Okay, so this is my Liam that I've been working on for a little while. And if you watched the last episode, you would know that I'm now moving her into some of the deeper colors, the richer skin colors, some of the layers that appear to be deeper into the skin. So first I'm going to look at her and I'm going to try to decide what colors is she not exhibiting. So I'm seeing pinks and I'm seeing faded hints of blue, which is all good. But what I don't have is I don't have any of the rich purples. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide what color purple is going to work best. Something with a really rich purplish red hue is going to be what I'm really trying to get. So I have these two, which are in the strawberry family. And so for the strawberry family, I could go with either one of these. But I see that with her complexion and her tone, I'm probably going to want to go with the darker of the strawberries. This is, I think, Strawberry Creases, I believe, from Authentic Reborn. So then I'm just going to get my applicator brush. This paint is already mixed, so it has some thinners in it. But I'm going to thin it down even just a bit more so that I get more of a washed look instead of the stark color. Just going to add a little bit of the thinner there. So that's moving pretty slow. So that's a bit thicker than I still want it to be. So I'm going to add just another little bit of thinner. Press out some of the clumps that have gathered. Because what I want to see is when I drag this up, when I'm swirling it and I drag this up, there's a nice thin wash that pretty quickly gets to the lighter colors. And as this wash is coming down off of the inside of the bowl, I'm going to choose, do I want to capture the darker colored paint that's coming down, the first run of paint, or do I just want to wait and catch this last light part? So now that that's mixed up really good, then I'm going to take out my trusty sponge. I like to use this one because this gives a nice skin patterning. Please excuse this terrible chair. I have ordered a new one, but this one's still screaming for help. So I'm just going to capture like this. And that's going to kind of trace around all those holes in the sponge. Now I don't want to just start out on a cheek with this dark paint because at this point I really don't know what the paint's going to do. So instead I'm going to start up here on the top of the head. Then I'm going to go across one temple and then across the other temple. Okay? I'm going to fade down some of that darker and spread it out just a bit. And then I'm just going to pull just a little bit down here that's already still on my brush. I just kind of want to touch on the other parts of the cheek and the face. Because I want it to be in the same family. So I don't want there to be like stark color contrasts everywhere. Because that's how you end up with a scorched baby look. So you can get too many reds, too many purples, and then it just turns into a bruise or a burn. So the way you don't have that happen is you just continue to make sure that you're using a little bit in the same family over everything. So we have the patches, we have some dark and some light, but we have everything in the same family. All the colors are going to work together. Then I'm going to get some of the light with my little dilapidated brush here. I've had this for years. It actually has transformed into quite a nice eyelid brush. So if you have a 1,000-year-old mop brush and it turns into something like this, just know that you can use it. Don't throw it away, because it can give a really nice pattern over the bridge of the nose and onto the eyelids. I'm also going to pull that down just a bit here. And this is going to help me start to build up that nice color. It's in the upper and the lower lid. And to fill in some of this very pale skin here, because we want the blue to be kind of translucent and a little transparent so that it looks like it's peeking up from underneath the layer of the skin. And the way that you get that is by applying layers over top of it that are also translucent, that allow it to look like there's another layer underneath. I like to take this out even a bit further, because sometimes babies can have that bit of a purpley look under their eyes. And her sculpt is made to have some of these little puffy bags, so I'm going to try to accentuate that. I wanted to use the purple because I want it to be a bit different than the shading color that I've used. I'm going to wait for a few seconds after that little swish, and I'm going to let it start to pull down at the bottom so that I get some of that lighter color. And then I'm just going to dab a little bit. What I do with this is I'm going to take my big mop brush and I just use that to pull a little bit of the paint off of the vinyl. So I can take those dark spots and I can just kind of melt them down in to a more workable tone. Sometimes I like to take the paint that I just mixed and make even a lighter wash. So I always try to have just a little cup of thinner that I can make a really, really, really transparent wash, because I want to pull some of that in here where she's got a lot of paleness that's going on there. And then I'm just going to find a smaller mop brush. I'm going to go around and I'm going to pull some of that out. And everywhere I have creased her, I'm just going to add a little more color right near there. And of course the apples of the cheek. I want them to be just a little more rosy than the rest of the face. So I think you can probably see, I'm not sure how the glare is, I'm still working on the lighting, so I'm sorry if it's not very good. But hopefully you can see that this purple has already blended in and taken away some of the pale parts of the complexion. And it's added another layer over some of the blues and the other reds. And then this would be when I would also check to see if I wanted to use a little bit of the same color to accentuate the lips. So I want to get any of the bits that are a little bit darker, because it has to cover up some of this lighter pink and a little bit more red. And my goal for her lips is that she just looks very, very pouty, very, very plush and soft. Soft little baby lips. And I think that you can probably see that that has worked out very nicely. So that looks really, really good. With kits like this that have a great bit of detail around the lips, and they have lots of creases and wrinkles in the lips themselves, you have to kind of be careful that you don't let paint pool down in those little ridges, because if the paint starts to pool down in the little ridges, then you can have trouble. That's not going to look very natural when it's all baked. Alright, so I've got the purples done. The only thing that I need to do now at this point is I'm going to get some of the thick paint, and I'm going to add just a little bit over the tops of the ears. Usually do this all at one time, and then I take my trusty dry brush and pull that extra paint out, and I just tamp it down, blend it down. So you can see that the amount of paint that I've put on this head this morning is really not wet. It's staying kind of dry, and it's evaporating very quickly. So that's exactly what I want to happen, because I don't want this paint to do anything strange. I want it to look very natural. So I'm just going to finish up with the purple across the back of the head. She's going to have a nice full head of hair. So I am just trying to bring the tones together from the face to the back of the head. Those little bits behind the ears, they like to stay a tad pale. It can be kind of difficult to get in there with a regular brush, but my dilapidated brush here does a great job. So I'm just taking the paint that was left at the top when it ran down. I'm taking the long part of my dilapidated brush and putting it as far back in toward the back of the ear as I can get it. And this is going to eliminate that stark contrast that we don't want. I can put a little bit up here at the front of the ear as well. Okay, so for this layer, I believe I am done. Maybe a little more over the eyebrows, or just under where the eyebrows are going to be. So this is really blending well with that bluish undertone across the eyes. This is going to bake up very nicely. You notice that I don't have any paint that's running. The only thing that looks damp is right here around the nose, and that's okay because that doesn't have any real fresh paint. That's just the thinner. So I feel pretty good about going ahead and putting her on the rack and getting ready to bake her. And then I'm going to start on her feet. Now you can do it a couple of different ways. You can start with the mottling and then move into the work on the darkening of the toes and the ball of the foot, or you can darken the ball of the foot, the toes, the heel, and all of that first. I prefer to do it that way because if I get the whole thing wet with the mottling, then how am I going to stabilize the foot to be able to do? Because I need to be able to hang on to the flesh of the calf to be able to make this work. So sometimes the Bountiful Baby kits, for some reason, and I may be the only person that has this problem, sometimes the Bountiful Baby kits for me will kind of get pale at the tips of the toes and the tips of the fingers. And I haven't found a way to stop that from happening, but I have figured out that going directly into the tips with the paint very gently can help to avoid having the paint be all washed off of that area. So then I'm just going to add a little bit over the heel here, pulling out the extra. And then I'm just going to let that air dry and move on to the next. I'm going to drag it right along the edge of the foot and down here where my reds start. I'm just adding just a tiny little bit. Again, I'm just trying to keep the family colors related to one another. And so I want it to appear in more than one place. I want that range of tones to be pretty apparent throughout the work, throughout the entire piece. And then I'm going to move on to the fingertips. I'm going to add in more of this color down here on the palm, the little fingers. I'm going to hit these creases once or twice and drag that out onto the knuckles and the top of the hand just a little. So you can see most of the paint is already off my brush when I'm doing this. And because this is a color that we haven't used before, I'm just putting a little bit of it on those more pale places. And then I'm going to pat that down, calm down the tone. That way it's not completely white, because obviously very tight fist, so. And then if I see any areas that are kind of staying pale, staying white, then I try to fix that as I go and just build it up as I see it. And again, just turning my bowl about a quarter of a turn. I'm going to start with the innermost. You can start however it feels natural to you. Me, I like to start with the inner and work toward the outer. Just kind of pouncing it onto all these areas. I like to leave this little bit of the palm blank with just a couple of really, really thin shades of pink, and the reason for that is because I like to do a blue overlay because the palms of the hands and babies can generally be a little bit blue. I'm going to really push this layer up between the fingers so that I can get rid of any kind of pale white streaks that tend to like to hang out there. And this is basically so that no matter what direction you turn your baby's hands, that they look naturally colored. I like to do some of the modeling on the hands during this phase of the paint with the brush, not always with the sponge, because I can kind of control where those little splotchy areas are. And then I'm going to take this, I'm going to pull some of that back out and tamp down some of the redness that I just created. Always check your fingertips before you bake, because sometimes, particularly with the Bountiful Baby sculpts, I have a lot of issues sometimes with the paint kind of clumping at the tips, and so I have to be really, really careful not to let that happen. As I'm seeing more little pale spaces, I'm just going to pop some paint in there. So now I've done the fingers and the toes and the hands and the feet. And these little feet have dried a little bit, so now I'm ready to move into doing the modeling for the arms and the legs. So I'm going to re-stir my paint here a little bit. And then I'm going to pull a little bit into my jar for a wash, in case I need that later. I'm just going to pop that in. You can start wherever you like. I like to put 2 fingers into the leg hole because that helps me have more control over the leg. And then I'm going to start up at the thigh. I like to work all the way around the thigh. Before I move on to the lower leg. And you can see that it starts out kind of dark, but it's fairly easy to drag that down into another area of the leg to pull it back up into the thigh a little bit. I like to do a little plop right across the top of the foot. Tends to look pretty natural once it gets baked in. Now for the wash. This foot's looking a little pale to me on the inside here, so I'm just going to add a little bit of the wash, and then I'm going to tamp it down a little bit. Then I'm going to go over this sponge modeling that I just did, and I'm going to tamp it down to where it's not so stark, so it looks kind of uniform all the way around. And if there are a couple of dark spots, sometimes they can look really nice, so I won't always tamp it down to an even layer. Just depends on how it looks and the look that I'm going for. I like to use the sponge and bring paint down the arms. And then I'm going to calm it down a little bit as I work. Sometimes you can get little alien fibers and things like that that can get stuck on your paint. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes just to get that stuff off. So then I'm just going to follow around to the inside of the arm. The inside of the wrist is the paler part of the forearm, so I'm not going to re-dip and make it darker. I'm just going to use whatever's on the sponge already. And I'm going to allow that to color the inside. If you start with the sponge in the darker areas where the skin's going to be naturally deeper in color, then it's pretty easy just to flip the limb and then start to kind of to pull the color around onto the more pale areas. And you can see that this paint is drying pretty quickly. And that's what I kind of want, because I want to be able to put her in the oven in just a minute. And then once again, I'm just going to calm down some of the purpley red. I want to leave some of the patches because that's going to look really nice later. What I find is that if it looks a little dark, you know, a little bit intense when it's in parts, that can actually be a good thing, because when you put the doll together, it changes the concept of the piece. And when you add clothing and a diaper, that can kind of wash out some of the color. So if you're finding that your babies are way too pale when you put them together, just try doing more of the darker colors. It's taken me a while to really learn how to build the darker colors without making them look really fake and really bad. So then I'm going to use my trusty New Wave oven. I'm just going to put these parts in. I bake mine on level 6 for 8 minutes. And then if I'm not in a hurry to put another kit in to bake, then I would just let her naturally cool in the oven. And that's probably what I'm going to do, since my main focus for right now is to get her ready to send her head for rooting. I'm probably just going to bake her, and then I'm just going to let her cool down in the oven. Another project I have, this is an Andy asleep. She is ready for hair. She's getting painted hair, so I've kind of let her vinyl rest. I'm going to give her one final bake before I start the hair, and then of course there's going to be probably at least 5 to 7 layers of the actual painting of the hair, because she'll need different layers, different thicknesses, darknesses, all that. She's going to have brown hair. And she's going to be a project that I'm going to pick back up this weekend and try to get her finished so that I can send her home. So once again, thank you for joining me. I appreciate your company in my little workshop. If anyone has any questions about anything that you saw me do with the work today, please feel free to send me an email at littleblessingsboutiquedolls@outlook.com. and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.